After decades of tensions and struggle for power between the European countries, the outcome would be one of the most disastrous and brutal conflicts in the world, known as the Great War. In August 1914, Germany found itself fighting on two fronts, in the west against France and in the east against Russia, with support from Austria-Hungary. Even though Germany thought that Russia would mobilize at a slow pace, it was surprised when they launched an invasion into the province of East Prussia. You are now watching our documentary about this event, with many dynamic tactics, stubborn fightings and decisive battles between the Russians and Germans. This long video took a long time to make, so I would appreciate if you would press the like and subscribe buttons and share this with a friend. In 1914, war spread across Europe like a plague, caused by an assassination in Sarajevo of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary then blamed Serbia for the death of their heir and sent some demands. After they rejected, war broke out between those two. Russia sided with Serbia while Germany with Austria-Hungary. As the German forces moved in France, Russia invaded the German province of East Prussia. However, this operation to reach Vistula River would eventually cause a disaster within the ranks, and a big catastrophe would await the large, less developed Russian forces. When it came with Russia, from 1888 and onwards, Germany had planned a defense. When Chief of the German General Staff, Helmuth von Moltke, abandoned the concept of a decisive offensive into the Russian territory and considered defensive positions. According to German intelligence estimates, the railway network in Poland limited the Russians to only three options. One would be a purely defensive position to hold the German army until a better mobilization. The second one would be an offensive down along the Vistula to Berlin, where they prepared to hold a parade and crush the enemy directly. Or a third option was an invasion of the German province of East Prussia with two Russian armies, one from Nauru and one from Niemen. The French political pressure blocked the first option, while the second was militarily unsound and kinda fanatic, leaving the third option as the most like Russian course of action in a future war. In 1894, Alfred von Schlieffen, the Chief of German Staff, considered a scenario where the Germans need to destroy one of the armies in a decisive battle and the second one in yet another major victory. Just like in the upcoming Battle of Tannenberg, with Russian Niemen army having overrun half of East Prussia, the German army would exploit the separation between the army of Niemen and Nauru. They would mass the troops against the right wing of the Nauru army and destroy the whole force. In the exercise critique, Schlieffen considered that the Germans would easily establish a defensive postion behind the Vistula if the situation went worse, but when the opportunity to destroy an entire Russian was available, it should be taken. Whereas Schlieffen's predecessor's Alfred von Waldersee idea had been to launch a spoiling attack on the Russians as they deployed and then wait for reinforcements from the west. Schlieffen foresaw a mobile operation on interior lines, using railways to mass forces against one Russian army and destroy it before it could retreat. As a result, every German general staff officer in East Prussia in 1914 knew how to respond to the Russian offensive and how to repel it. Russia signed the Triple Entente with France and UK, while Germany was part of the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy. The tensions between the two were brewing, and in 1910 they reached their peak. On June 28th, the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a Bosnian Serb nationalist, and tensions between Austria-Hungary and Serbia exploded. On July 23rd, an ultimatum was issued from Vienna to Belgrade, and thus, after some terms were rejected, war started on July 28th. Russia mobilized, Germany did the same and declared war on each other. Then the Germans thought it was the best time to put the Schlieffen Plan in action. The plan consisted of an easy victory over France by moving the forces through Belgium and Paris, and then kick on the slow mobilizing Russia by moving the troops east. Germany issued an ultimatum to France and then entered Belgium with resistance by the Belgian army while declaring war on France. UK was mad at the German action and German violation of the Belgian neutrality, and so they declared war. Russia wanted to relieve pressure from the French back and then launched an offensive in Galicia and prepared one for the Germans by getting ready to attack East Prussia. In mid-August, The invasion was led by two Russian armies. The First Army, which was commanded by General Paul von Rennenkamp and consisted of 6.5 infantry divisions, 5.5 cavalry divisions, 472 guns, 254 machine guns. Later 7 new reserve divisions arrived. And the Second Army, under the command of General Alexander Samsonov, composed of 11 infantry divisions, 3 cavalry divisions, 720 for guns, 430 for machine guns. They were confronted by the German 8th Army, commanded by General Maximilian von Prittwitz and consisting of 14.5 infantry divisions, 1 cavalry division, 770 for guns, 396 machine guns. Each Russian division consisted of 16 battalions, the German 12. Russian and German battalions also differed in the number of personnel and weapons. Although outnumbering the enemy, the Russian army had numerous problems that contributed to its defeat. Russia was not prepared for a large war at the time, and its rearmament program was not completed, as was known to the Germans. Many soldiers were untrained, its transport service was largely ineffective and slowed down the movement of troops, its forces were spread out over a large territory and had little coordination with each other, allowing the enemy to engage each part of their army separately. Like in the Battle of Tannenberg or the Battle of Stalluponen, and most importantly, its intelligence gathering technique was greatly inferior to that of the Germans due to lack of reconnaissance units. The planning of the invasion was rushed in order to help France as quickly as possible and not well thought out. The German 8th Army also had numerous problems. Half of it consisted of newly drafted elderly reservists. The German Empire last participated in a war in 1871 and the Russian Empire in 1905. Therefore, the German military had no combat experience, while the Russians mostly did. This was especially true of officers and senior military leadership. General Samsonov and Rennenkamp participated in the Russo-Japanese War. At the beginning of the war, the Russians had no problem with a shortage of weapons or ammunition. Their armies were fully equipped with guns and machine guns. Thus, the small German army, with commanders without modern combat experience and half-staffed by hastily assembled reservists, had to face off against vastly superior enemy armies with combat experience from the recent war with Imperial Japan. For decades, Germany and Russia knew that a war was about to break out between them, and both parties had planned how to destroy each other. Germany wanted to organize a defensive with the 8th Army under Maximilian von Prittwitz, while the Russians an offensive to the Vistula with the 1st Army under Paul von Rennenkamp and the 2nd one under Alexander Samsonov. Rennenkamp would be the first to take action and would encounter the German army in a major battle at Gumbinnen, where he would either continue his advance or retreat. The German 8th Army was composed by the 1st Corps under Hermann von Francois, the 17th Corps under August von Mackensen, and the 1st Reserve Corps under Otto von Below was against the Russian 1st Army. While in the south, the 20th Corps under Friedrich von Scholz was facing the army of Samsonov. The 8th Army consisted a total of 100 battalions supported by reserve and Landwehr formations. German defences included fortifications along the Masurian Lakes, the Königsberg fortifications and the Torania fortress. The combined Russian forces consisted of 208 infantry battalions and over 9 cavalry divisions with 192 squadrons. The first attacked north of the Masurian Lakes, while the other army south. However, quite quickly, Russia was able to mobilize an invasion into East Prussia. Any invasion of Prussia was an important blow to German morale as well as her general strategic situation. The German deployment on the outbreak of the war left only the 10 divisions of the German 8th Army under General Maximilian von Prittwitz in East Prussia, whereas the Russians had been able to mobilize the 1st Army under General Paul von Rennenkamp and the 2nd Army under General Alexander Samsonov. They entered East Prussia on 7 August. Anticipating that the Russians would attack north of the Romanter Heath, then west along the Pregel Valley, Prittwitz ordered Hermann von Francois 1st Corps to take up positions along the Anjarap River. However, Francois advocated a forward defence and by 13 August had advanced his corps along a line from Goldap to Stalluponen, 32 kilometers east of his orders. On 15 August, Rennenkamp crossed the border with 6 infantry divisions, intending to follow the railway through Stalluponen and Gumbinnen. On 15 August, Francois men encountered 1st Army's reconnaissance units northeast of Stalluponen and captured Eiton that night. As the Russians withdrew, on 16 August, Prittwitz ordered Francois back to the Gumbinnen as he moved the 8th Army to the Angerat after his Fliegerabteilung 16 reconnaissance flight spotted the 2nd Army concentrating. However, Francois kept his 1st Infantry Division at Stalluponen and his 2nd Infantry Division divided between Goldap and Tolminkamen. On 17 August, Rennenkamp advanced with all 3 of his infantry corps, but in an uncoordinated fashion. His cavalry was to the north, while the 20th Corps, with the 28th and 29th Infantry Divisions, north of the road, and the 3 Corps, with the 25th and 27th Infantry Divisions on the road and south of it. The 4th Corps, with the 40th and 30th Infantry Divisions, were advancing on the Romint Heath further south. Francois called up General Adalbert von Fork's 2nd Infantry Division in Tolminkamen and his howitzers in Gumbinnen to reinforce his position in Stalluponen as the battle intensified by midday. At 1 p.m, Prittwitz's envoy arrived and ordered Francois to retreat to Gumbinnen. Francois' reply was to tell General von Prittwitz that General von Francois will break off the engagement when the Russians are defeated. As Fork advanced, he was able to attack the flank of the Russian 27th Infantry Division near Garitten, when a gap formed between the Russian 27th and 40th Infantry Divisions. A furious frontal attack broke the Russian division, which fled eastward, losing 3,000 casualties and 5,000 prisoners, including almost the entirety of the Russian 105th Regiment. Although the Russian 29th and 25th Divisions achieved some success to the north of Stalluponen and captured several captives and guns, they couldn't change the outcome of the battle. Francois decided not to pursue the Russians and instead ordered a withdrawal to Gumbinnen. As ordered, Prittwitz, capitalizing on Francois' success, moved his forces forward while Francois held Gumbinnen. According to Pritt-Buther, provided that the Russians did not concentrate all their forces against East Prussia and therefore sent substantial numbers of troops against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. 8th Army should be able to hold out without conceding too much ground until victory over France was assured. All that was required was for Prittwitz to avoid defeat and to hold his nerve. Originally, Prittwitz had intended to hold the line of the Angerat and allow Rennenkamp to suffer heavy casualties while trying to force the position. German aerial reconnaissance by the Fliegerabteilung 16 indicated a gap had formed between the Russian 1st and 2nd Armies, while radio intercepts indicated Rennenkamp had halted his army for a rest. On 20 August, Francois scouts, following his success at the Battle of Stalluponen, reported the northern flank of the Russian 1st Army was exposed and requested the 2nd Infantry Division for an attack, with support by the 17 Corps and 1st Reserve Corps. Reluctantly agreeing, Prittwitz commented, "1st Corps had made a soup for us and we will now have to eat it up." With his initial success, Francois had persuaded Prittwitz to launch an offensive against the Russian 1st Army while the 2nd Army was still far to the south. Francois argued that his troops, many of whom were native East Prussians, would be demoralized by retreating and leaving their homeland to the Russians, and that the Russians were not as strong as they appeared to be. A radio message that did not use codes supported this assessment. On the morning of 20 August, after a night march, the German 2nd Infantry Division advanced through the Zulkana forest and outflanked the Russian 28th Infantry Division, having been left unprotected by Hughes and Khan-Nikshivinsky's cavalry. The German 1st Infantry Division engaged the Russian 29th Infantry Division at 3:30 a.m. as the German 2nd Infantry Division inflicted 60% casualties on the Russian 28th Infantry Division, capturing Morwishkin in the process. To the south, Mackinson's 17th Corps and Below's 1st Reserve Corps were still moving up and were not ready for combat. Hearing of Francois's actions further north, Mackinson's 35th and 26th Infantry Divisions attacked Rennenkamp's 3rd Corps, consisting of the 25th and 27th Infantry Divisions, at 4:30 am. However, Below was not able to join in until noon. The Russians in this area were well aware of German intentions due to Francois's attack, and had spent the time preparing for the assault by moving up their heavy artillery. At first, the German advance went well, but it faltered once it came under Russian artillery fire, and the Russians were able to turn the German flanks and force the enemy to retreat in disorder to the Insterburg-Angerburg lines, leaving 6,000 prisoners in Russian hands. Meanwhile, Bülow's 1st Reserve Corps, instead of advancing on Goldap as ordered, turned north to help Mackensen. His flank was then attacked by the Russian 30th Infantry Division. The Germans were unable to advance and support Mackensen, while both sides suffered heavy casualties. The German 3rd Reserve Division, commanded by Kurt von Morgen, arrived too late on the scene to intervene. According to Buther, it had been a day of mixed fortunes. Despite suffering losses, Francois' 2 divisions had been largely successful. Mackensen's corps, by contrast, had been effectively knocked out of action. Its troops streamed back in disarray, with Mackensen and his staff swept along in the flood. 1st Reserve Corps to the south had acquitted itself well, but had ended just short of a decisive success. The German hopes of a swift victory, allowing them to turn triumphantly against Samsonov's 2nd Army in the south, looked increasingly forlorn. Only Friedrich von Scholz's 20th Corps opposed Samsonov's 2nd Army. Prittwitz suffered a lack of confidence, especially when he learned that reconnaissance showed the Russian 2nd Army consisted of 5 corps and a cavalry division, with 6 of those Russian divisions about to cross the border and move towards Mlawa. Telephoning Moltke, Prittwitz stated that he intended on retreating to the Vistula. Moltke responded with anger, since the German strategy of defending against one Russian army and then moving to confront the 2nd Army was now at risk. A retreat to the Vistula could allow both Russian armies to combine. Eventually, Prittwitz changed his mind and decided instead to attack the Russian 2nd Army. A change from facing an army to the east to an army in the south had been rehearsed by the Germans during war games. Franzois's 1st Corps, joined by the 3rd Reserve Division, would move by train to the west of 20th Corps. The 1st Reserve Corps and 17th Corps would withdraw westwards. In the meantime, Samsonov was delayed in his advance because of the lack of good railways and roads, and Rennenkamp was slow to pursue the withdrawal because of his losses and limited supplies. As Mackensen commented, "I had the strong impression that my corps had not been outfought, nor had it suffered such heavy losses. In complete calm and good order, and without any interference by the enemy, it made its withdrawal." Prittwitz's panic affected Moltke, who feared that Berlin itself could now be threatened by the advancing Russians. On 21 August, Moltke decided to replace Prittwitz and his chief of staff, Georg von Waldersee. Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff assumed their roles on 22 August. Prittwitz became the 1st Army commander to be dismissed in World War I. Rennenkamp's 1st Army crossed the border on 17 August, moving westward slowly. This was sooner than the Germans anticipated because the Russian mobilization, including the Baltic and Warsaw districts, secretly began on 25 July, not on 30 July when the Tsar ordered. Rennenkamp was defeated by Francois at Stalluponen but continued his advance towards Gumbinnen, where Prittwitz attacked on 20 August when he knew from an intercepted message that the army was resting. But the German attack was stopped and they had to retreat, an action that made Moltke furious and eventually led him to replace Prittwitz with Hindenburg. The 1st Army was splitted from the 2nd, and this was a perfect opportunity to destroy Samsonov's army. By the next morning, 21 August, 8th Army staff realized that because Samsonov's 2nd Army was closer to the Vistula crossings than they must first relocate most of their forces to join with 20th Corps to block Samsonov before they could withdraw further. Now Moltke was told that they would only retreat a short distance. Francois protested directly to the Kaiser about his panicking superiors. That evening, Prittwitz reported that the German 1st Cavalry Division had disappeared, only to later disclose that they had repulsed the Russian cavalry, capturing several hundred. By this point, Moltke had already decided to replace both Prittwitz and his chief of staff, Alfred von Waldersee. On the morning of 22 August, Their replacements, Colonel General Hindenburg and Major General Erich Ludendorff, were notified of their new assignments. The 8th Army issued orders to move to block Samsonov's 2nd Army. 1st Corps on the German left was closest to the railway, so it would take the long route by train to form up on the right side of 20th Corps. The other 2 German corps would march the shorter distance to 20th Corps' left. The 1st Cavalry Division and some older garrison troops would remain to screen Rennenkampf. On the afternoon of 22 August, the head of the 8th Army Field Railways was informed by telegraph that new commanders were coming by special train. The telegram relieving their former commanders came later. 1st Corps was moving over more than 150 kilometers, 93 miles of rail, day and night, 1 train every 30 minutes, with 25 minutes to unload instead of the customary hour or 2. After the battle at Gumbinnen, Rennenkampf decided to pause his 1st Army to take resupply and to be in good positions if the Germans attacked again. This caused them to lose contact with the German army, which he incorrectly reported was retreating in haste to the Vistula. Both Russian armies were having serious supply problems. Everything had to be carted up from the railheads because they could not use the East Prussian railway track, and many units were hampered by a lack of field bakeries, ammunition carts and the like. The 2nd Army also was hampered by incompetent staff work and poor communications. Poor staff work not only exacerbated supply problems, but more importantly, caused Samsonov during the fighting to lose operational control over all but the 2 corps in his immediate vicinity, 13th and 15th Corps. On 21 August, Samsonov's 2nd Army crossed the border and quickly took several border towns. The 6th Corps took Ortelsburg, while 1st and 15th Corps advanced onto Soldau and Neidenberg. On 22 August, Samsonov ordered 25th Corps to advance towards Hohenstein, which they did on 23 August, pushing Friedrich von Scholz's 20th Corps out of Lana. The new commanders arrived at Marienburg on the afternoon of 23 August. They had met for the first time on their special train the previous night, and now they rendezvoused with the 8th Army staff. 1st Corps was moving by the rail line, and Ludendorff had previously counter-ordered it further east, at Deutsche Lau, where it could support the right of 20th Corps. 17th Corps and 1st Reserve Corps would march towards the left of 20th Corps. Ludendorff had delayed their marches for a day to rest while remaining in place should Rennenkampf attack. The German 1st Cavalry Division and some garrison troops of older men would remain as a screen just south of the eastern edge of the Königsberg defences, facing Rennenkampf's 1st Army. Hindenburg summarised his strategy: "We had not merely to win a victory over Samsonov, we had to annihilate him. Only thus could we get a free hand to deal with the second enemy, Rennenkampf, who was even then plundering and burning East Prussia." The new commander had raised the stakes dramatically. They must do more than stop Samsonov in his tracks, as they had tried to block and push back Rennenkampf. Samsonov must be annihilated before they turned back to deal with Rennenkampf. For the moment, Samsonov would be opposed only by the forces he was already facing, 20th Corps, mostly East Prussians who were defending their homes. The bulk of the 2nd Russian Army was still coming towards the front. If necessary, they would be allowed to push further into the province, while the German reinforcements assembled on the flanks, poised to encircle the invaders. Just the tactics instilled by Schlieffen. Jelinsky had agreed to Samsonov's proposal to start the 2nd Army's advance further westward than originally planned, separating them even further from Rennenkampf's 1st Army. On 22 August, Samsonov's forces encountered Germans all along their front and pushed them back in several places. Jelinsky ordered him to pursue vigorously. They already had been advancing for 6 days in sweltering heat without sufficient rest, along primitive roads, averaging 24 kilometers a day, and had outrun their supplies. On 23 August, they attacked the German 20th Corps, which retreated to the Orlo Franca. The Russians followed, and on the 24th, they attacked again. The now partially entrenched 20th Corps temporarily stopped their advance before retreating to avoid possible encirclement. At one stage, the Chief of Staff of the Corps directed artillery fire onto his own dwelling. Samsonov saw a wonderful opportunity because, as far as he was aware, both of his flanks were unopposed. He ordered most of his units to the northwest, toward the Vistula, leaving only his 6th Corps to continue north towards their original objective of Seeberg. He did not have enough aircraft or skilled cavalry to detect the German buildup on his left. Rennenkamp mistakenly reported that 2 of the German corps had sheltered in the Königsberg fortifications. On 24 August, Hindenburg, Ludendorff and Hoffmann motored along the German lines to meet Schultz and his principal subordinates, sharing the roads with panic-stricken refugees. In the background were columns of smoke from burning villages ignited by artillery shells. They could keep control of their army because most of the local telephone operators remained at their switchboards, carefully tracking the motorcade. Along the way, they drove through the village of Tannenberg, which reminded the 2 younger men of the defeat of the Teutonic Knights there by the Poles and Lithuanians in 1410. Hindenburg had been thinking about that battle since the evening before, when he strolled near the ruins of the castle of the Teutonic Order. In 1910, Slavs had commemorated their triumph on the old battlefield. Aided by Russian radio intercepts, a captured map of Russian positions, and information from fleeing German civilians of Rennenkamp's slow progress, Hindenburg and Ludendorff planned the encirclement of the Russian Second Army. 1st Corps and 20th Corps would attack from Gilhenburg towards Neidenburg, while 17th Corps and 1st Reserve Corps attacked the Russian right flank. They met with Schultz and his 20th Corps staff on 24 August and Francois on 25 August, where he was ordered to attack towards Austau on 26 August. Francois stated only part of his corps and artillery had arrived. Ludendorff insisted the attack must go forward as planned, since more trains were expected beforehand. Francois replied, "If it is so ordered, of course an attack will be made, and the troops will obviously have to fight with bayonets." On the way back to headquarters, Hoffmann received new radio intercepts. Rennenkamp's most recent orders from Zielinski were to continue due west, not turn southwestward towards Samsonov, who was instructed to continue his own drive northwest, further away from Rennenkamp. Based on this information, Schultz formed a new defensive flank along the Drewens River, while his main line strengthened their defenses. Back at headquarters, Hindenburg told the staff, "Gentlemen, our preparations are so well in hand that we can sleep soundly tonight." Samsonov was concerned by the German resistance with their earlier advance, and aerial reconnaissance spotted the arrival of the German 1st Corps. However, Samsonov was ordered by Zielinski to attack northwest with Mardos' 15th Corps and Clive's 13th Corps, while 1st Corps protected the left flank and 6th Corps was positioned on the right at Bischofsberg. Zielinski was visited by the commander of the Russian army, the Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich of Russia, who ordered him to support Samsonov. Von Francois commenced his attack early on the 25th August, with his 1st Infantry Division advancing towards Sieben, his 2nd Infantry Division on its southern flank, and the rest of his corps arriving by train during the day. He captured Sieben by mid-afternoon, but saved an advance on Austau for the next day. North of von Francois, Schultz's 37th and 41st Infantry Divisions faced the Russian 2nd Infantry Division, which fell back with heavy losses. On the left flank of Schultz's 20th Corps, Kurt von Morgen's 3rd Reserve Division was ordered to advance onto Hohenstein, but held back out of concern that the Russian 15th and 13th Corps would threaten his left flank. Clive's Russian 13th Corps was ordered to advance onto Allenstein. On Samsonov's right flank, Alexander Blagoveshenko's Russian 6th Corps soon faced Mackensen's German 17th Corps and von Below's German 1st Reserve Corps. Von Below, to the right of Mackensen, advanced to cut the road between Bischofsberg and Wardenburg. Blagoveshenko's 16th Infantry Division occupied Bischofsberg, while his 4th Infantry Division was north of Rothflies, and his 4th Cavalry Division was at Sensburg. The 16th Infantry Division was ordered to move towards Allenstein, while the 16th Infantry Division was split between Loudon and Gross-Borsau. Mackensen's 36th Infantry Division, on the right, and his 35th Infantry Division, on the left, advanced towards Bischofsberg. The Russian 4th Infantry Division suffered heavy losses and retreated towards Ortelsburg. In an attempt to send reinforcements, Blagoveshinsky split the 16th Infantry Division between Bischofsberg and Ramsau. However, they were met in the flank and rear by von Below's Reserve Corps and retreated in disarray. That evening, the 8th Army's staff was on edge. Little had been achieved during the day when they had intended to spring the trap. 20th Corps had done well on another torrid day, but now was exhausted. On their far left, they knew that 17th Corps and 1st Reserve Corps were coming into action, but headquarters had learned little about their progress. In fact, 17th Corps had defeated the Russian 6th Corps, which fled back along the roads. 17th Corps had endured long marches in sweltering weather, but some men still had the energy to pursue on bicycles requisitioned from civilians. Hoffmann, who had been an observer with the Japanese in Manchuria, tried to ease their nerves by telling how Samsonov and Rennenkamp had quarreled during that war, so they would do nothing to help one another. It was a good story that Hoffmann treasured and retold frequently. In Hindenburg's words, it was now apparent that danger was threatening from the side of Rennenkamp. It was reported that one of his corps was on the march through Angerberg. It is surprising that misgivings filled many a heart, that firm resolution began to yield to vacillation, and that doubts crept in where a clear vision had hitherto prevailed. We overcame the inward crisis, adhered to our original intention, and turned in full strength to effect its realization by attack. Von Francois was ready to attack the Russian left decisively on 27 August, hitting 1st Russian Corps. His artillery barrage was overwhelming, and soon he had taken the key town of Osdor. In the center, the Russians continued to strongly attack the German 20 Corps and to move northwest from Allenstein. The German 17th Corps and 1st Reserve Corps pushed the Russian right wing they had blooded the day before. Further back, General Basil Gorko, commanding the Russian 1st Army Cavalry Division and from 1916 to 1917 Chief of the General, was told later that Samsonov was not aware of what was happening on his flanks because he was observing the action from a rise in the ground a distance from his wireless set, and reports were not relayed to him. On the morning of 28 August, the German commanders were motoring along the front when they were shown a report from an aerial observer that Rennenkamp's army was moving towards their rear. Ludendorff announced that the attack on the Second Army must be broken off. Hindenburg led him behind a nearby hedge. When they emerged, Hindenburg calmly said that operations would continue as planned. Later radio intercepts confirmed Rennenkamp was still slowly advancing on Königsberg. Von Francois' 1st Corps resumed his assault on the Russian 1st Corps, taking Soldau by late morning, and then advancing onto Neidenberg as the Russian Ikers became an ineffective force in the battle. Scholz's 20th Corps to the north also advanced, though his 41st Infantry Division was badly mauled by Mardos' Russian 15th Corps. It held its ground, while the German 37th Infantry Division reached Hohenstein by the end of the day. The German 3rd Reserve Division was also able to advance on the Russian 15th Corps, forcing Samsonov to order a retreat to Neidenberg. Von Below's German 1st Reserve Corps engaged Clive's Russian 13th Corps west of Allenstein and became isolated. Kliuev received orders from Samsonov to retreat towards Kirchen. Mackensen's German 17th Corps continued pursuing the retreating Russians. One half of the German encirclement was complete by the end of the day. As Ludendorff wrote, the enemy front seemed to be breaking up. We did not have a clear picture of the situation with individual units, but there was no doubt that the battle was won. On 29 August, von Francois' cavalry regiment reached Willenberg by evening, while his 1st Infantry Division occupied the road between Neidenberg and Willenberg. Von Francois' 1st Corps patrols linked up with Mackensen's German 17th Corps, who had advanced to Jedwabno, completing the encirclement. On 29 August, the troops from the Russian 2nd Army Center who were retreating south ran into a German defensive line. Those Russians who tried to break through by dashing across open fields heavy with crops were mowed down. They were in a cauldron centered at Frogenor, west of Tannenberg, and throughout the day they were relentlessly pounded by artillery. Many surrendered. Long columns of prisoners jammed the roads away from the battleground. Hindenburg and Ludendorff watched from a hilltop with only a single field telephone line. Thereafter they stayed closer to the telephone network. Hindenburg met one captured Russian Corps commander that day, another on the day following. On 30 August, the Russians remaining outside of the cauldron tried unsuccessfully to break open the snare. Rather than report the loss of his army to Tsar Nicholas II, Samsonov disappeared into the woods that night and killed himself. His body was found in the following year and returned to Russia by the Red Cross. On 31 August, Hindenburg formally reported to the Kaiser that 3 Russian Army Corps 13th, 15th and 21st had been destroyed. The 2 Corps 1st and 6th that had not been caught in the cauldron had been severely blooded and were retreating back to Poland. He requested that the battle be named Tannenberg, an imaginative touch that both Ludendorff and Hoffmann claimed as their own. Samsonov's Second Army had been almost annihilated, 92,000 captured, 78,000 killed or wounded, and only 10,000 mostly from the retreating flanks escaping. The Russians had lost 350 big guns. The Germans suffered just 12,000 casualties out of the 150,000 men committed to the battle. 60 trains were required to take captured Russian equipment to Germany. The German official history estimated 50,000 Russians killed and wounded, which were never properly recorded. Another estimate gives 30,000 Russians killed or wounded, with 13 generals and 500 guns captured. To David Stevenson, it was a major victory, but far from decisive, because the Russian First Army was still in East Prussia. It set the stage for the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes a week later, when the reinforced German 8th Army confronted the Russian First Army. Rennenkamp retreated hastily back over the Piave border before they could be encircled. The battle was humiliating to Russia as it meant their army was weak. British Field Marshal Sir Edmund Ironside saw Tannenberg as the greatest defeat suffered by any of the combatants during the war. It was a tactical masterpiece that demonstrated the superior skills of the German army. Their PRI war organization and training had proven themselves, which bolstered German morale while severely shaking Russian confidence. Nonetheless, as long as the Great Battle in the West continued, the outnumbered Germans had to remain on the defensive in the East, anticipating that the Russians would make another thrust from Poland against Germany, and because the Russians had defeated the Austro-Hungarians in the Battle of Galicia. The Russian official inquiry into the disaster blamed Zielinski for not controlling his 2 armies. He was replaced in the Northwest Command and sent to liaise with the French. Rennenkamp was exonerated, but was retired after a dubious performance in Poland in 1916. Hindenburg was hailed as an epic hero, Ludendorff was praised, but Hoffmann was generally ignored by the press. Apparently not pleased by this, he later gave tours of the area, noting, "This is where the field marshal slept before the battle, this is where he slept after the battle, and this is where he slept during the battle." However, Hindenburg countered by saying, if the battle had gone badly, the name Hindenburg would have been reviled from one end of Germany to the other. Hoffmann is not mentioned in Hindenburg's memoirs. In his memoirs, Ludendorff takes credit for the encirclement, and most historians give him full responsibility for conducting the battle. Hindenburg wrote and spoke of "we," and when questioned about the crucial tete-a-tete with Ludendorff after dinner on 26 August, resolutely maintained that they had calmly discussed their options and resolved to continue with the encirclement. Military historian Elsa wrote that a few months before his death, Hindenburg finally acknowledged that Ludendorff had been in a state of panic that evening. Hindenburg would also remark, "After all, I know something about the business. I was the instructor in tactics at the War Academy for 6 years." After crossing the border in mid-August, the Second Army, composed of 5 corps, fought the German 20th Corps under Friedrich von Scholz. Samsonov's goal was to reach Vistula instead of helping the First Army under Rennenkamp, who was advancing at a slow pace. But later, 3 new German corps arrived. Hindenburg and Ludendorff were now commanding the 8th Army. After crucial fighting, Samsonov's army was encircled and virtually annihilated, but Rennenkamp was still in East Prussia and the 10th Army was coming to his aid. According to Prit Buther, as the magnitude of the disaster that had befallen Samsonov's army became clear, Rennenkamp ordered his men to pull back from their most advanced positions. First Army took up a line running from the Diime Valley in the north, through Wehlau and Nordenberg, to the northern shore of the Mausee, immediately to the west of Angerburg. His reserve division formed the new 26th Corps. On his northern flank, Between Wehlau and Nordenberg were his 3rd and 4th Corps. The 2nd Corps was placed opposite the German garrison in Lotzen. In addition, Rennenkamp received 5 newly formed reserve divisions, 54th, 57th, 68th, 72nd, 76th. The total strength of the First Army was more than 300,000 men, including 50,000 in reserve garrisons of fortresses in the rear of the First Army. The 10th Army filled the gap with what was left of the Second Army. The 10th Army was newly formed and consisted of the 23rd Corps from Finland, the 3rd Siberian Corps, the 1st Turkestan Corps, and the 2nd Caucasian Corps, with the 22nd Corps opposite Lich and the 3rd Siberian Corps to their south. 2 corps were kept in reserve. The total strength of the 10th Army was 250,000 men. In the reserve of the 10th Army, there were garrisons of fortresses with more than 37,000 men. On 31 August, Hindenburg received the following orders: 11th Corps, Guards Reserve Corps, and 8th Cavalry Division are placed at your disposal. Their transport has begun. The first task of 8th Army is to clear East Prussia of Rennenkamp's army. When the situation in East Prussia has been restored, you are to contemplate employing 8th Army in the direction of Warsaw. Hindenburg and Ludendorff placed their Guards Reserve Corps, 1st Reserve Corps, 11th Corps and the 20th Corps on the Russian northern flank. Their 17th Corps was deployed at Lotzen and their 1st Corps around Lich. The total strength of the 8th Army was 244,391 men, including troops against the 2nd Russian Army. During September 2nd and 3, the Russian cavalry occupied Culloden and Schallecken and faced the German infantry across the Dieme River. The Russian 3rd Army Corps repulsed all German attacks at Levenhagen and was preparing for pursuit by the forces of the 1st Guards Cavalry Division. The Russian 4th Army Corps at Gross-Wolfsdorf repulsed the attacks of the German 1st Reserve Division and occupied Friedland with the forces of the 40th Infantry Division. But on the left flank of the 1st Russian Army, the situation worsened. On the side of the 2nd Army Corps, the German 20th Army Corps occupied Rastenburg and Baden. The Russian 2nd Guards Cavalry Division retreated from Drengfurt. The 1st Cavalry Division of Vasily Gurko, advancing on Allenstein, was met by fire from the German 147th Infantry Regiment and 2 squadrons of the 11th Dragoon Regiment. Having lost 5 officers and 15 soldiers, Gurko was able to knock the Germans out of position, but could not withstand a counterattack of the cavalry brigade and retreated in battle to Krolikin. By September 7 and 8, the command of the 8th German Army unhinderedly concentrated shot groups in front of the positions of the 1st Army, and the intensification of operations east of Königsberg disoriented Russian intelligence. The Guards Reserve Corps 3 Road Guards, 1st Guards Reserve Divisions. Commander General of Artillery Max von Gorwitz took over the site near Allenberg, and the 11th Army Corps 22nd, 38th Infantry Divisions. Commander General of Infantry Otto von Plusko took over the site near Nordenberg. The concentration and offensive of the Russian 22nd Army Corps, the vanguard of the Russian 10th Army, at first did not meet with Germans' opposition, but on September 7, the German offensive began against the 10th Russian Army. The German 3rd Reserve Division, after a 2-hour artillery preparation, captured the city of Biala, capturing 400 prisoners and 8 guns from the detachment of Lieutenant General Stanislav Stelnitsky 1st, 2nd, 4th and 12th Finnish Rifle Regiments. The next day, the Kurt von Morgen Group broke through the Russian defences and entered the operational space. To counter the enemy offensive, the 2nd and 4th Finnish Rifle Brigades were sent to Lich, the 10th Finnish Rifle Regiment to Erich, and the 27th Siberian Rifle Regiment to Gradzwo. The 8th Siberian Rifle Division of the arriving 3rd Siberian Army Corps was supposed to go to the rear of the Germans. The German 1st Army Corps advanced on Gumbinnen, where the 1st Infantry Division took up to 1,000 prisoners. Another 1,000 defenders, parts of the 43rd Infantry Division and the 3rd Finnish Rifle Brigade lost killed and wounded. The commander of the 10th Russian Army, Infantry General Vasily Flug, ordered the 22nd Army and 3rd Siberian Corps 97,084 men, 192 machine guns, 240 guns to go on the offensive on Johannesburg. But on the night of September 8, the German 3rd Reserve Division attacked the junction of the 1st and 10th Armies near the city Lick. The 22nd Army Corps left the city by the morning of September 9, having lost 96 killed, 493 wounded and 350 missing. The 36th Reserve Division released Lützen, capturing 1,000 prisoners and 16 guns. The 43rd Infantry Division and the 3rd Finnish Rifle Brigade retreated under the onslaught of the Germans from Armies. The commander of the Russian 22nd Corps, von Brincken, considered it necessary to withdraw troops to the defensive line, but the commander of the 10th Army forbade the retreat and ordered at all costs to strike and assist the 1st Army. Von Brincken objected. The continuation of the battle would lead to a complete loss of combat capability and no assistance would be provided. He proposed to withdraw the vanguards of the army to Augusto, concentrate there, arrange the rear and organize supplies, and then go on the offensive with a single fist. After negotiations with the headquarters of the armies of the Northwestern Front, Flug allowed to withdraw to Augusto. On September 9, the Guards Reserve Corps of Artillery General von Gallwitz went on the offensive against the center of the 1st Russian Army near Allenburg. His 3rd and 1st Reserve Guards Division started a battle at the crossings across the L River, and here they encountered stubborn resistance from the Russian 3rd and 20th Army Corps, reinforced by the 54th and 72nd Infantry Divisions. With great difficulty, with the support of the Landwehr from the fortress of Posen Division of Lieutenant General Anatole Graf von Bredow, they managed to gain a foothold at Redden and Schillen. The Russian artillery inflicted especially great damage on the attackers. Von Gallwitz ordered at night the artillery brigades to get as close as possible to the Russian positions in order to open fire at close range in the morning and suppress the Russian batteries. From Posen, heavy artillery arrived in the corps under the command of Lieutenant General Gericke. The situation on the left flank of the 1st Army was becoming threatening. The distracting group of Morgan wedged into the location of the Russian troops and created a threat of encirclement in front of the rivers in Struch and Angerap. The Russians took urgent measures to strengthen the flank and to gradually withdraw troops from under the blow of the Germans to the Angerap River. By the evening of September 9th, a grouping of troops was assembled to launch a counterattack on the flank of the corps of Hermann von Francois and Morgan. For this, 9 Russian divisions were concentrated in the Goldap area, the 2nd and 20th Army Corps, the Gurko Cavalry Detachment and the 54th, 57th and 76th Infantry Divisions. Rennenkamp ordered to shoot anyone who left the trenches without an order. He also turned to the headquarters of the armies of the Northwestern Front with a request to support his actions. With the offensive of the 10th Army, but the Quartermaster General of the headquarters, Major General Leontiev, stated that the corps have not yet been arranged. At the same time, during the day, the Guards Reserve Corps was able to build 5 bridges on the L River on both sides of Allenburg. To parry a possible Russian counterattack and German reconnaissance established the arrival of 2 divisions. Bredow's Landwehr Division was advanced to the threatened direction, and to the south of Tapiu, a detachment of Wolgemut from the garrison of Königsberg 5 battalions and 2 squadrons with strong artillery. Rennenkamp did not lose hope of repelling the blow of the German army. He instructs the Husenkarnitschewenski to move to Goldap and delay the advance of the Germans. The Rauch Division is directed to Benkheim and Margerbow, the detachment of Lieutenant General Anatoly Rosenshield 54th and 28th Infantry Divisions to Trempen and Kizelen, the 29th Infantry Division to Darkamen. The defense of the Diome River was entrusted to the newly formed 26th Army Corps of Infantry General Alexander Jerngross 53 Road and 56th Infantry Divisions, 73rd Artillery Brigade. Throughout the day on September 9th, units of the Russian 3rd Army Corps held back the Germans at Allenburg and the 4th Army Corps at Bavien, but in the 2nd Army Corps, the Germans occupied Widmenen, went to Lake Gablick, where they were stopped by the 1st Cavalry Division. Entering the battle. In the battles, the Russian 302nd Surash Infantry Regiment was defeated. The commander of the 1st Brigade of the 26th Infantry Division, Major General Druzhinin, was killed. At Kutton, the Russian 72nd Infantry Division was brought into battle. Rennenkamp also counted on a powerful blow with 3 corps in the direction of Mallorcan, Werborn, Neukirchen, Nordenburg in the center and northern flank of the Germans. On September 7, the Russian Second Army launched a diversionary attack on Masurian and captured the city by the night of September 10. The cavalry drove out the enemy's vanguards from Friedrichshof. These attacks were carried out by a few detachments, since the army had not yet recovered from the defeat. The attack on Mlawa was not successful, but by the morning of September 13th, Jano was taken. During this time, 17 prisoners were captured. Russian losses were 22 killed, 120 wounded, and 19 missing. The main result of the actions of the Second Army during this period was that the German Eighth Army was deprived of the opportunity to reinforce the troops against the First Army at the expense of its southern group. Only on the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief did the Second Army begin to retreat to its original positions, since the headquarters of the front armies feared a breakthrough here too. On September 10, the shock group of the First Army launched an offensive from the Godap area, but was met by Hurricane artillery and machine gun fire, first at the attacking chains and then at the Russian positions. Taking advantage of the confusion, the 1st German Reserve Corps captured Goldap on the move, taking 1,000 prisoners and 32 guns in the city, and then advanced to Insterburg. Having lost a springboard for regrouping, the Russian Second Army Corps retreated. His 43rd Infantry Division suffered heavy casualties. In the companies of the 26th Infantry Division, 5 to 10 men remained at lost more than 4,000 men. Rennenkamp was furious at the failure of the counterattack. He demanded from the commander of the 20th Corps, General of Infantry Smirnov, the most energetic actions to support the Second Army Corps. Using the success of the 1st Army Corps and 1st Reserve Corps, the divisions of the Guards Reserve Corps crossed the Al and Omet rivers and began the pursuit to Valo. On September 10, the headquarters of the 22nd Army Corps moved to Augusto. 4 brigades of the Corps, united in the detachments of Stelnitsky and Lieutenant General Vladimir von Notbeck, retreated to Kalanoan and Lake Gumbinnen. The German regiments of the 1st Army Corps at that time launched an offensive against the flank of the Russian Second Army Corps. The 44th Infantry Regiment of the 2nd Infantry Division occupied Gross Pilikin and Gross Jakunovan, capturing 657 Russian prisoners, including 7 officers and 8 guns. The 3rd Reserve Division entered Lick. The combined cavalry corps of Lieutenant General Hermann Bernhard Brecht, 1 Saint and 8th Cavalry Divisions moved into the gap between the flanks of the 1st and 10th Russian armies. By evening, the German cavalry reached Kavalen, intercepting the retreat routes of the 1st Army. The German 1st and 17th Army Corps were involved in the battle for Goldap, and the 3rd Reserve Division and the 1st Cavalry Brigade defended Lick against the troops of the Russian 10th Army. The Russian 20th Army Corps, reinforced by the 54th, 57th and 72nd Infantry Divisions, suffered huge losses, over 16,000 men, not counting the completely destroyed 72nd Division, but did not allow the Germans to enter the Russian rear. The divisions of the 3rd and 4th Army Corps defended steadfastly at the turn of the Omet and Anjarap rivers. Their resistance did not allow the collapse of the right flank of the 1st Russian Army, and created an opportunity for the transfer of 2 divisions of the 20th Army Corps and then the cavalry corps of Khan Nakhichevan to the breakthrough side of Brecht's German cavalry. Only on the night of September 12th did the Russian 40th Infantry Division retreat across the Anjarap River and destroy the bridges behind them. Her losses exceeded 1,600 men. Until the evening of September 11, the Guards and the 1st Reserve and the 11th Army Corps and 20th Army Corps of the Germans could not move forward against these forces. Nevertheless, the results of the battle on September 10th were depressing for Rennenkamp. By midnight, the 2nd Army Corps retreated across the Gadapa River. The counterattacks of the 20th Army Corps were repulsed. The Germans, with the forces of the 1st Reserve Corps, pursued the Friedrichswald. The Guards Reserve Corps occupied Neumel, Hohendamerow, the Woljamut detachment Wellau. Considering the growing threat of covering the left flank of the army, Rennenkamp ordered on the night of September 11th to begin a withdrawal. The commander of the 10th Army, General of Artillery Vasily Flug, on the morning of September 11th, attacked Lich with the 3rd Siberian Army Corps' 7th and 8th Siberian Rifle Divisions and the 22nd Army Corps. The 3rd Siberian Army Corps persistently attacked Lich until the morning of September 12, and although the city was never taken, the German command attracted the Landwehr Division of von der Goltz from the Nehru direction to defend it. The 3rd Reserve Division was unable to reinforce the bypass group, which crashed south of Goldap into the flank of the 1st Army. But the detachments of Stelnitsky and Notbeck, who received the task of hitting the rear of the Germans at Margrabowa and Wieliczkin, were just deploying. In total, the 10th Army lost 343 killed, 1,105 wounded and 451 missing in these battles, and captured 4 wounded German soldiers. On September 11th, German corps began pursuing the retreating Russian corps of the 1st Army. The Guards Reserve Corps crossed the Pregolaya River and reached Norrköping. The 1st Reserve Corps entrenched itself in Insterburg. The 1st Army Corps in Romanton Forest. The 17th and 20th Army Corps reached Nemmersdorf. The 9th Landwehr Brigade successfully advanced to Tilsit, bypassing the right flank of the Russians. The stubborn resistance of the troops of the 1st Army led, however, to significant fatigue of the Russian troops and to a temporary loss of control over them. There were also extremely heavy losses. In a few days, the 1st Army lost 3,603 killed, 13,200 to wounded, 40 for missing. The 2nd and 20th Army Corps retreated with a battle for Geweden and Gross Sobrost. The 2nd Guards Cavalry Division, after a stubborn battle at Kavalen, retreated to Tolminkmen. The 1st and 2nd Guards Cavalry Divisions retreated to Gherkin. The retreat of the 1st Army soon took on the character of flight. In previous battles, the Germans managed to create a threat of encirclement of the left flank with a blow from the Raminka Forest to the north, with cutting off the massive von Ronnenkamp's troops on the Anjarap River. This caused the haste of the withdrawal of 3 corps, the mixing of troops, and the loss of communications. On September 13th, Rennenkamp, who retreated with their headquarters and command of the army in Kovna, lost command of the troops and restored communication only by the night of September 14th. The loss of communication was caused primarily by panic in the immediate rear. The army was served by large telegraph and telephone centers in Suwalki, Augusto and Sejny. At the first news of the retreat of the army on September 12th, the civil administration abandoned their posts and fled, cutting telegraph and telephone lines. Therefore, the blame for the loss of command and control lies to a large extent on the civilian department. On September 12, the 20th Russian Army Corps retreated to the Trikanen-Tolminka-Haine line, continually coming under fire from German artillery. On September 14th to 16, the divisions of the corps retreated successively to Marijampol, Lyudvinovo and Simnes. The troops suffered heavy losses during the withdrawal. As a result, the 54th Infantry Division was disbanded. By September 19, the 28th and 29th Infantry Divisions were entrenched in positions near Aladus. On September 12, the divisions of the 26th Army Corps took up a position at Kusen-Kadanau, keeping in touch with the 3rd Army Corps and preparing to repulse the advancing Germans. The 53rd and 56th Divisions and the 5th Rifle Brigade fought a stubborn battle until late in the evening, when the 3rd Corps had already retreated to Vilkaviskas. By nightfall, the corps broke away from the Germans and withdrew to Savinta River and Vladislavov. On September 13, the 53rd and 56th Divisions withdrew to Sakiri. The 53rd and 56th Divisions were withdrawn from the corps to the reserve of the 1st Army, and in return the 57th and 64th Infantry Divisions were subordinated. The 9th Landwehr Brigade of Lieutenant General Hermann Clausius advanced on Tilsit. On this site there was a detachment of Major General V. Mum 1 Saint Brigade of the 68th Infantry Division and 1st Division of the 68th Artillery Brigade and the 6th Torage and Border Guard Brigade. The flanks of the detachment were provided by the 1st Separate Cavalry Brigade and the 53rd Infantry Division at Labiau. From the evening of September 11, the Germans pressed the border guards from Kavalen to the Alexandrovskoy. By the morning of September 12, the Germans made their way to the bridges on the Niemen and by noon completely surrounded the city. From 15 o'clock the bombardment began. The cavalry retreated to Kovna. In Tilsit, an uprising of the population began. Retreating Russian troops were shot from the windows of houses. The 270th Gatchiner Infantry Regiment was surrounded and, while trying to break through, lost its commander. Colonel Volkov was captured, almost all the officers and 3,000 soldiers. 8 machine guns, 16 guns were lost, and General Mumm was also captured. The remnants of the detachment's 8 officers and 869 soldiers retreated to Shavli. The 22nd Army Corps was ordered to go on the offensive to rescue the 1st Army, hitting the rear of the Germans. The attack was scheduled for noon, but the Commander-in-Chief of the Armies of the Northwestern Front, Cavalry General Yakov Zhelinski, categorically forbade the attack. After the Germans occupied Suwalki on September 14, the brigades of the Corps were assigned to Lipsk, Staben. On September 16, the Germans knocked down the Corps from the Augusto position and occupied it. The Corps managed to gain a foothold at the crossings near Lipsk and Sapetskin and received the task of defending the paths to Grodno. The soldiers pursued by the Germans, deprived of leadership, lacking not only ammunition but also provisions, began to surrender en masse. The panic began. The Germans captured 12,000 men and 80 guns. By September 14, East Prussia was cleared of Russian troops. They continued to retreat across the Niemen River. On September 14th and 15, the German vanguard captured Mariampol, Suwalki, Vladislavov, and Pulviskaya. An attempt to stop the Germans at Mariampol by the forces of the Russian 4th Army Corps failed. He retreated, losing 52 killed, 163 wounded, 83 missing. On September 15, the German 3rd Reserve Division captured the city of Augusto, left by the 22nd Army because of the 10th Army. Nevertheless, Rennenkamp managed to restore control of the troops, withdrawing the army beyond the Niemen from Olida to Kovno. He escaped encirclement, although the Russian troops were defeated. The pursuing German cavalry also suffered significant losses. So, in the battles of September 10th and 14, the Saxon cavalry regiments of the 8th Division lost 9 officers killed, including the commander of the Horse Guards Regiment, Major Grafen, and 29 soldiers, 8 officers and 53 soldiers wounded, 2 missing and 1 soldier capture. Casualties of the First Army at the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes were estimated by the staff of the Russian Northwestern Front at 100,000 men, of which up to 50% were prisoners, 122 machine guns and 150 guns. For the entire East Prussian campaign, according to the lists of regiments and reports of the commanders of divisions and brigades, First Army, 275 officers and 9,347 soldiers were killed, 557 officers and 25,616 soldiers were wounded, 449 officers and 65,608 soldiers were missing. In total, 1,826 officers and 115,370 for soldiers, including without indication casualty categories, 545 officers and 14,219 soldiers of the 54th and 72nd Infantry Divisions. Due to the defeat of a number of headquarters and the loss of documents, the casualties of almost the entire 54th Infantry Division remain unexplained. As of September 18, 1914, 284 officers, 11,810 soldiers, 24 machine guns, 19 guns were missing in the division. It was disbanded, and partially also the disbanded 72nd Infantry Division and the 76th Artillery Brigade. Lost without categorization only 25 officers, 1,100 soldiers, 40 guns. First Battle of the Masurian Lakes was the development and continuation of the plan of the command of the 8th German Army to destroy the Russian armies invading East Prussia. Hindenburg and Ludendorff decided to repeat the encirclement operation, organizing a powerful strike at the junction of the 1st and 10th Russian armies with access to the rear of the 1st. The 8th German Army lost for the whole of September 1914 1,555 dead, 10,412 wounded and 1,552 missing. More than 30,000 Russian prisoners and 150 guns were announced to have been captured. In the battles of September 7th to 15, emphasis was placed on the qualitative superiority of the German troops in artillery, on maneuvering with fire, The Russian troops were not ready for this, and their defense could not withstand the long artillery preparations that had not been used before. Nevertheless, the First Army was not surrounded. The firmness of the defense on the Anjarap River made it possible to fend off the maneuver of the German cavalry and prevent it from destroying the headquarters and rear of the army. However, the actions of Rennenkamp were dissatisfied. Vasily Flug angrily wrote to the Chief of Staff of the Armies of the Northwestern Front, Vasily Oranovsky, "The catastrophe with Samsonov made such a deep impression that we want to avoid any action involving even the smallest risk, forgetting that there is no victory without risk. To justify our indecision, we put forward the colossal numbers of troops that the enemy allegedly has. The Germans seem to us ubiquitous. Having lost 321 officers, 14,585 soldiers, 31 machine guns, 30 guns, the 72nd Infantry Division was disbanded. Its commander, Major General Orloff, was transferred to the reserve ranks. Head of the 30th Infantry Division, Lieutenant General Edward Kolyankovsky. Commander of the 28th Artillery Brigade, Major General Malio. Head of the 1st Separate Cavalry Brigade, Major General Oranovsky. Commanders of the 110th, 112th, 113th, 117th, 169th, 223rd, 287th, 288th Infantry, 16th Irkutsk Hussars, 34th Don Cossack regiments were removed from their posts. The rule of the Russian occupation authorities in East Prussia caused great damage to the province. The victims of the Russian troops were 19,000 civilians, of which 1,620 died, including those who were shot without trial, 433 were wounded, and 10,000 were driven to Russia. 33,553 houses were destroyed or partially destroyed, 100,000 people were left homeless and without property. A third of the population of the province, 800,000 people, became refugees. 24 cities, 572 villages, 236 estates were destroyed. Russian troops stole 135,000 horses, 250,000 cattle, later 20,000 horses, and 86,000 cattle were recaptured, and 200,000 pigs. The robbery was led by the military department, which created a special commission on the basis of the commissariat of the Dvina military district. All the confiscated property was brought to Vilna, where the applications of interested parties for a share of the loot were sent. Agricultural machinery and implements, machine tools, personal items, clothes, underwear and footwear including women's and children's furniture, sanitary ware, bathtubs, toilet bowls, watches, cutlery were subject to confiscation. In total, the list, compiled later for the Chief of Staff of the Dvina military district, includes 697 positions of various items regardless of their number in each item. These consequences of the war, characteristic, however, for each of the fighting armies, contributed to the bitterness of the struggle. At the end of 1914 in Germany, Russian generals taken prisoner were brought to trial for crimes against civilians. The court acquitted them as they carried out the orders of their superiors. Almost immediately after the liberation of the province, Emperor Wilhelm II arrived in East Prussia. He visited Lodz and other cities, was in the immediate rear of the 8th Army. On October 7, 15 million marks were allocated for the restoration of the province. On 11 September, Grand Duke Nikolai dismissed Yakov Zhilinsky as the commander of the Russian Northwestern Front, replacing him with Nikolai Ruzsky. The Grand Duke then ordered the 5th Army from Galicia to a position north of Warsaw. On 14 September, the last of the Russian army had retreated over the frontier as the German 1st Infantry Division reached Vilkovishki within Russian territory, and the German 3rd Reserve Infantry Division had reached Suwałki. On 15 September, the Germans formed the 9th Army to protect Silesia. The German advantage was bought at a cost. The newly arrived corps had been sent from the Western Front, and their absence would be felt in the upcoming Battle of the Marne. Much of the territory taken by the Germans would later be lost to a Russian counterattack during 25 to 28 September.